Good morning and welcome to Maryland Today. My name is Jeff St. Pierre, and joining me today is Nina Heck, the Director of Counseling and Client Services at Consumer Credit Counseling Service of Maryland and Delaware. Nina, I feel like it's been forever since I've last seen you.
It really hasn't been too long, Jeff, but I'm sure glad that you invited us back.
Of course. It's always a pleasure to have you in here. Well, something that we've talked about on this show over the years is credit scores and credit reports. You know, a lot of us recognize that having a good credit score is important, but a lot of misconceptions out there about how they work, the differences, things like that. So let's try to demystify the credit rating process. To start, why is it so important to have a good credit score?
Well, Jeff, your credit score is actually your financial calling card. It shows your credit worthiness. Having a good credit score opens the door for any potential loans or mortgages, credit cards, whatever it is that you're looking to add to your portfolio of finances. One of the other things that people don't often think about is it also is pulled when you're looking to rent. Insurances, different insurances will use that, and even utility companies can pull your credit report just to see and see what your score is to determine, whether or not it's favorable.
Well, something that we always hear is we hear credit scores and we hear credit reports. So why don't we talk about the difference between these two terms?
So, Jeff, the credit report is based on information provided to three major credit reporting agencies: Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. And this information talks about how you pay your bills, whether it be on time or paying them in full, or even if you've paid them behind or had delinquency on there. It will show that as well. It also has personal data, and I often point our consumers to look at all the information on there, including their previous addresses, their social security numbers, and their birth dates. It will show records of bankruptcy, anything that's gone to a court as a judgment. So any of that information can be found on there. And I have to tell this one story. I had a client that called and was very concerned because after pulling her credit report, it determined that she had passed on. So you really do need to look at all the information that's on your credit report so that you know that it is accurate and correct.
Well, how about a credit score then?
The credit score is the number that determines your financial reliability. So this is pulled together based upon how your paying history has been with the creditors that you have.
So what's more important? Is it your credit report or your credit score?
Well, I think everyone always thinks it's the credit score, but actually the credit report, because there's so much information on that credit report that people are looking at. So again, I draw your attention always to look at all the information and make sure it's accurate. One of the things that oftentimes can really cause a problem is when people aren't pulling these credit reports, they might find out that there's been some form of identity theft, and they won't know it until something alerts them, maybe a phone call at home, from someone letting them know that.
So if you want to check your credit report, how can you go about doing that?
We often send people to annualcreditreport.com, and you have the option of pulling one free credit report each year. So again, you have Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. You can stagger those. That's something I usually encourage people to do, is stagger them out through the course of the year, and that allows you to look at them at different times to see if anything's changed. But you certainly can pull all three at one time.
How long does information stay on your credit record?
Well, the good information stays there forever, which is wonderful. The bad information, whether it be delinquencies, collections, charge-offs, repossessions, Chapter 13s, that information stays on for 7 years. Chapter 7 bankruptcies can show up to 10 years on a credit report. And, of course, there's always tax liens that can show pretty much forever.
Well, we all know that it's smart to pay your bills on time. But on your credit report and credit score, when is a payment considered late?
Well, that's a good question, Jeff. The important answer is to understand that 35% of your credit score is determined by your payment history. So credit reporting perspective, late means anything that's over 30 days.
Okay.
One of the things I would always have a consumer, maybe someone who's never been late before and something happens and they pay late, contact your creditor. It may be something that they will give you a one-time forgiveness if you've never been late before. But typically once you pay over 30 days, they have the opportunity to hit the credit score with that lateness. And for a credit card, you're looking at 10-point variance. But when you start looking at secured loans, maybe mortgages or car notes, something of that nature, it can hit your credit score as much as 100 points and bring it down.
Well, I'm glad to hear that it's 30 days because I have a reminder in my email to tell me what days I have to pay my bills. And I always panic when it falls on a Saturday, per se, because I know that the bank's not going to transfer the money on a
Over there
Saturday
fast enough,
for me.
yes.
And then I always get like, well, your payment was a day late. I'm like, no, I swear I set it up. So 30 days is very good to know. So if I'm a day late on something by accident, then I can still survive here. Okay.
Yes.
Well, let's keep going on here. If you want to improve your credit score, what are some suggestions that you have, things that we can do?
So one of the ways that you can do it right off the bat is with most credit grantors, they will open up a line of credit for a certain amount, and you want to keep the amount that you owe to that creditor, whether it be a credit card, a line of credit, that type of an account, below 35%. This is part of the debt utilization ratio, and so that looks a lot more favorable. Oftentimes, we see clients that don't understand why they have a bad credit score. They've never missed a payment. However, they're up to the credit limit on almost all of their accounts. And that's the reason, because it's affecting their credit score because of their debt utilization ratio. So, for instance, if you had a $5,000 balance on a credit card and you only owe $500, then you've only got a 10%, and that's very favorable because, again, you're trying to keep under that 35%.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Well, Nina, CCCS is chock full of information to help people at any sort of financial situation. So before we move on here talking about credit scores and credit reports, why don't we give the information of how people can contact CCCS if they feel like they need some help?
Certainly. They can call us at 1-800-642-2227, and they can access us on the web at cccs-inc.org.
All right, Nina, so what can listeners do if they feel like they owe too much?
So, Jeff, when they look at their budget, what they want to do is look at their needs versus their wants. And one of the areas that I often find that people spend too much might be packing lunches versus buying lunches every single day, or picking up that cup of coffee every single morning. So there often are places in a budget that a person is able to reduce, and finding that money allows them to make additional payments to other things that are more urgent.
Well, Nina, you mentioned throughout this interview that the amount of debt that you owe has an effect on your credit score. But how about your income and personal assets? Do they affect your credit rating too?
They're not necessarily something that you're going to see on the credit report. So what happens, though, is, of course, your income is what allows you to have the credit that you have available on the credit report. One of the things that you need to understand, though, as far as your personal items, is things such as check writing. If you end up having a bad check experience with your bank, that can go into a collection account and inadvertently can end up on your credit report and lower your credit score. So there are things in your household expenses, if you paid utilities, have been late, something like that that normally doesn't pop up will show if it becomes a delinquent account and goes into collections, as well as cell phones and cable bills.
Well, I've heard it doesn't pay to close credit accounts if you hope to maintain a good credit score. Is this true?
Well, actually, Jeff, what we generally say is that if it's an account that's been on there for a very long time and you haven't used it and there's no activity, then it doesn't hurt to close it. Sometimes it's good to not have those laying out there. What's not good is to go on a credit closing spree and shut down a lot of accounts, because this can affect your credit score. Always use good judgment when you decide on a creditor that you're going to close. Know that it's something that you probably are never going to use again.
Well, we also sometimes hear that you can increase your credit score by opening credit accounts. Does this make sense?
It does if you're a person who's never had credit. This is one of the things when we counsel people that are trying to start out. You know, we might often suggest that they go to a retailer or a bank or credit union and open up a small account with a low credit limit on it just to get started. So this is favorable. So they start to present a score at that point. But typically it's not something you want to encourage people to do, because what can happen is every time you walk up to these stores and they say, if you open your card today, we'll give you 15% off. And before you know it, you've got a pocket full of credit cards. And then from a lending perspective, when you have a credit report that shows all these different accounts, there's a lot of risk involved, because the concern is you may not have balances on them at this point, but if you start using those, you can put yourself in a real critical area fast.
Well, Nina, before we move on here, let's get that contact information out one more time if anybody listening would like to seek out some help from CCCS.
They can reach us, Jeff, at 1-800-642-2227 and our website at cccs-inc.org.
So, Nina, how do inquiries affect your credit rating?
It really just depends on what type of inquiry that we're talking about. Oftentimes when people are purchasing cars, for example, it may pull a multitude of inquiries, but what they've determined, what a credit reporting agency determines with that, is that's still looked upon as just one pull. Versus if I'm out there and I'm just applying for this credit card or that credit card,
Sure.
store card, and then you end up with multiple inquiries, which will stay on the credit report for up to 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And then there's a difference in a hard pull, which would be if, again, I'm applying for a credit card, maybe through a store or bank, versus a soft pull where I might pull my own credit, and that doesn't impact my credit score at all. Or maybe a landlord pulls it, for renting purposes, or a job pulls it. Those are considered soft pulls, and that's not going to affect the credit score.
I remember the first time that I heard about that was actually when I was looking to buy a car a few years ago, and somebody told me, be careful how many times you look for a car, because every time they look at your credit score, that can actually bring you down a little bit. So does that actually hurt your credit rating when you fill out applications for something like a car, for example?
Well, again, as long as you're not applying at every car dealership down the highway, you should be okay, because
Okay.
it is a multitude of different financial institutions that particular car dealership may be working with. However, it is considered one pull.
So how can you tell if you've got a good credit score? What is a good credit score?
It's funny you ask this. We get calls all the time for this. I had someone recently that called and said, my credit score is 457. Is that good? So understand that the credit reports run anywhere from 300 to 850.
So if I have a 125, that's bad.
You're probably not going to get any credit, Jeff, which is good. If your intention was not to have any, then it's good. But obviously what you want is the higher it goes, the better it is.
Sure.
The rule of thumb is anything above 750 is very good, and anything below 600, you're going to have trouble in more cases than not getting probably the credit that you want. It's not that you won't get credit. Oftentimes when you have those lower scores, you can find people that will lend to you. However, the interest rates are higher. The terms are not as good. When you go to purchase something, they may want a higher down payment. A landlord may want more of a deposit than they would if I had a really good credit score.
So if you already pay your bills on time and you don't have too much debt, what can you do to maintain a good credit score?
You just want to make sure that you continue to pay on time. You don't want to use different names, because sometimes that can back up on you if you have, signing or opening accounts in a different name. One of the things I always caution people, though, it would be about co-signing. And oftentimes that can be a real deterrent, because once you apply with someone and put your name on that, if they don't pay, you are responsible. So their paying habits are reflective on your credit report.
If you've got a low credit score, does it pay to hire a credit repair company to help you clean it up?
I would say not really, because generally as a rule, there's most of the things that they could do for you, you can do for yourself.
Sure.
One of the things is if there's information on your credit report, and again, this comes from being positive and pulling your credit reports and staying on top of this so you know what's on there. But if you find something on there that shouldn't be, then you can dispute the information. And if in fact it isn't accurate, they will be required to remove the information. Credit repair companies often work from the pretense that they're going to increase your score by being able to clean up things. But in fact, if those things are accurate, they will not go away. So it does come back onto your credit report. And there's also a fee involved with these, so it makes more sense. I always tell people to, do the work themselves, and it's better, it's more fulfilling to understand it and know what you're trying to do with your credit.
I can only speak from personal experience, but I know a few years ago, and I've talked about this when I've been speaking with people from CCCS, I had some credit situations of my own, and I did go through a credit repair company. I was not aware of the different options that were out there, and they are for-profit organizations. So
yes, they are.
I found about halfway through my plan, or whatever you want to call it, with them, that I was paying them to do work that I could easily do myself, and I ended up making the switch. But after, I paid a lot of extra money that I really didn't need to pay. So it is important to be careful about what organization you go to. An organization like CCCS is a fantastic organization that offers a lot of free support as well. And Nina, before we wrap things up here, let's talk about that contact information. How can people who may be in trouble get in touch with you to get the help that they need?
So if you have questions about your credit report, we offer that advice as well. So you can reach us at 1-800-642-2227, or on the website at cccs-inc.org.
Well, Nina Heck, the Director of Counseling and Client Services at Consumer Credit Counseling Service of Maryland and Delaware, otherwise known as CCCS, if you didn't pick up on that through the interview here today. I really appreciate you coming by. This is a very hot topic, credit scores, credit reports, something that we hear about all the time. Thank you so much for giving us more information about this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for having us.